And I think our first speaker is Christian Moore Anderson. He has done work in teaching biology at the high school level with systems thinking and stocks and flows. And I would like to turn it over to him now.
Thanks, Diana. Do you want me to share my
I want
slide?
you to share your slides and introduce yourself. Give
Okay.
a few minutes about yourself as well as sharing your slides.
Okay. Yeah. Can you see my slides?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
good. So that's me. That's my picture. Um, I'm a secondary school teacher. I teach from 11 years old, and I teach IB biology, so up to 18. I got introduced to stock and flow models by John Darko. I don't know if you've met John. Um, that was quite a few years ago now, and since then I've not looked back. I developed a way of teaching with qualitative models, so I don't really have much space in my curriculum for quantitative models. But let's say half of my lessons are maybe at least qualitative stock and flow models that we build. And I do that all the way from the 11-year-olds all the way to the top. I'm lucky enough to teach a lot of my students year upon year. And that means they kind of get trained. So I see stock and flow models as a way of doing biology. It's a culture that we build, and I've trained or I'm training a couple of teachers who also work with me, and they're starting to get used to them as well. One of them's a physics specialist, and she's starting to see if they work a little bit in physics as well. Um, I want to show you what these might look like because a lot of people don't really know. And then here's some stuff from year seven. I've focused a lot recently on putting concrete elements into the stocks and flows for the students because I find without them, here we've got some fur and some hands and feet, and the stronger students don't need them, but the weaker students find these incredibly useful. They can get a bit more complicated. This is greenhouse effect. This is like for 14-year-olds. And here's another example from IB biology. This is the synapse. Again, with concrete elements, which I like to put in. When I show these to teachers, I have a blog and I blog about how I teach with these. And I think it's quite rare to teach this way. A lot of teachers teach with PowerPoint and I draw. And they look at this and they say, like, how the hell do you teach with this? So I've spent quite a lot of time over the last few years building blog pieces about how I would teach and build them step by step. And that's what I want to show you today. So Diana asked me to come on and show you how I would do this. It's based on a certain epistemology, which is from enactivism, which is stems from cybernetics. So it's still kind of a systems epistemology. Variation theory as well is quite allied with that area. And then obviously modeling. So the tool is the stock and flow, but the way that I teach is grounded in activism. So these are just some basic rules. I don't just explain. This is something that's quite hard for teachers. When you first show them the models, they think, what do you do with these? Do you just explain them? Just project them. And when I've given models to teachers, sometimes they've just done that. They've just projected it and just explained it, and that's not really how I do it. So it's not about explaining; it's about conversing. We bring the model forth together. They draw with me, so they're not just watching. So we keep adding elements. They draw it. They have their own copy that they can run their fingers over, can add notes to, and the last point is very similar to the first one, is that we're not holding students' attention because I'm not transmitting a model to them. They have to bring the model into being. So I don't hold their attention. I'm always prompting their attention with questions. So I just thought the best way was to try and show you how it might feel to be in my class. I'm not going to draw because I don't have very much time, but I took a part one model. This is how I would begin a lesson. We'd sit down and we'd begin drawing. And I always give some parts stocks, always begin with stocks, sometimes not even giving them the names of the stocks. And the point is that they have to build it with me. So the first question here I would ask my students would be, what would you name the flows? Obviously, students need to know the distinction between a stock and a flow. I normally do that by the flow names are always gerunds, so they end in ing, and that's a rule that they follow. So I would have them talk in pairs, and they would then discuss what names they would come up with. This one is about glucose. The model is going to be about how we maintain the glucose within certain levels and not get diabetes. They would then I would ask a few students. They would raise their hands. We would talk about it. I would get people to vote if they agreed or disagreed, and eventually we would come up with some names of flows, which might look like this. This part is actually the most important part of the lesson because these are key distinctions of what the flow of glucose. For example, the very last one, the glucose in the tissues, we burn that up in cell respiration, and students can find that quite hard. And they find generally outputs quite harder than inputs, especially at the beginning. And as it becomes a way of being, they get more and more used to the idea of inputs and outputs happening simultaneously. It just becomes something they expect to find. So now we have this model, and I'd introduce a rule here and then ask them a question. And it's basically about diabetes. If your blood glucose is too high, it wrecks your circulatory system, you go blind, you get kidney disease and your feet fall off. And obviously if your blood glucose is too low, then your brain is, starved and you can go into a coma. So the rule is you've got to try and keep that blood glucose within limits. So it's part of like a homeostasis rule. So with that rule in place, I asked them another question, and that would be this: what difference would this make? An animal that ate continuously and one that ate large meals with, I can't really read what it says because of the things in the way, with long fasts, I think that says, yeah.
Yes, with long fasts.
Long fasts. And then this is a problem to solve. And the only way they can solve it is really by working with the model. This is a very simple one because it's linear. And they talk in pairs, we discuss again. So like, again, I'm not holding their attention. I'm not just telling them. They're having to choose. And by making choices, that's how I prompt them to create the model themselves. They're making choices. In this case, an animal that ate continuously, one with large fasts. If it had large fasts, we're working on the idea that they have to keep it within normal glycemia. They would struggle. Huge amounts of glucose would come at once. So it'd be high blood glucose. Eventually, during the fast, would go down to low blood glucose. Whereas if the animal ate continuously, then it would be able, if you think like a cow who's just eating all day, the blood glucose might remain stable. According to this rule, then, if we follow this rule, then it would be better to eat all day and just eat small amounts, be a cow or a horse, a sheep. But then we have a problem now because we see animals and we say, well, what about, other animals? You've got lions or whatever who eat maybe once a day. Some crocodiles eat once every 6 months. And so they've got a problem to solve. How can these other organisms exist that fulfills this rule of normal glycemia? How can they do it? And that's when they come to the idea that we need an additional store. So we get a store now. A store that takes it out of the system, stores glucose in the liver, and then it can release it when it's needed. So without having to tell the students about glucose homeostasis, I presented the problem to them, and they were able to come to the idea before I talk about the biological details. Biology is full of vocabulary and parts, and I say I like them to see the system before the parts. So we have a system, and then I have to add the parts. So then I would teach the details, which include the pancreas producing insulin. Insulin causes the liver to uptake the glucose, and then of course that causes there to be less glucose in the blood. Now, I want them to bring forth the model. So this takes some time. We talk about it. We talk about the biological details, but then eventually I want them to start thinking about the model again. So the first question is, this looks like a loop to me, and which type of loop is it? So we always vote on this. They know negative loops and positive loops off by heart. Following around, we realize, oh, this is a negative feedback loop. And then I say, okay, well, how do you put this onto the model? And then if they go with their pencils, or, there has to be a pencil because they get it wrong and they need to rub it out. So they have to go with the pencils, and I walk around and see what they're doing and how they add to the model. And eventually they will get, this would be what I would hope. And then we have a connection between glucose and insulin with the uptake of glucose. Now we need the direction of the connection. The positive and negative connections we know as same and opposite, and we vote on these. So again, they're making choices. So I'll point to this section here, and I'll say, okay, well, is this going to be same or opposite? They'll vote. If there's discrepancy in the class, we have to talk about what it is, and if there's not, I'll just move on, and I say, okay, what about this one? And we vote on that, and we should get something like this. Then again, I'm gonna ask them again, because I can see a loop. This is a loop. We said over here it was a negative feedback loop, but I like always to, in my experience, students take quite a long time to understand feedback loops. And the way we do it is we put our finger on it and we march around it a few times and see what it says. Here it says, so if we start off with high blood glucose, and then I would get them to say, so what does that cause? And then they would chant higher insulin secretion. And then I'd say, okay, so higher insulin secretion causes, and they would then chant the higher uptake of glucose. So what does a higher uptake of glucose cause? And then we come the full circle and we say lower blood glucose. And you say, so higher blood glucose, if we go around, causes lower blood glucose. This is a negative feedback loop. Then depending on the model, this is quite a nice model for this. Then I can ask them to draw graphs. So I'll draw a graph here for this stock here, and I'll say, okay, but what if somebody has a meal? So that means glucose is coming in. And they will again get the pencils out and draw their graph. Might look something like this, where we've got insulin. And this represents now at 14 years old, this is what's on my curriculum. They just need to know about insulin, and this is the model. And then I would like to now explore diabetes. So what happens when the system malfunctions? So we talk about type 1 diabetes. My dad is a type 1 diabetic, so I have a lot to talk about. So I tell them, okay, the pancreas doesn't work. So we add this here. So, type 1 diabetes means no insulin secretion in this case. I added that in notes. It's literally zero insulin. So now we do a graph again. So what we're using the model, they can trace their fingers, and we draw another line. You can see that the line still drops a little bit, even though there's no insulin. And then I can ask them again, why is that? They have to look through the model, and they'll find that from the blood, there's two outflows. There's one here and one here. So even with somebody who's type 1 diabetic, the blood glucose should drop over time because it's going to go into tissues and be used to be burnt up for energy. Then we've got type 2 diabetes, which also is something I'm very interested in. So we talk about that and what's happening in society. And that's a very different part malfunction here. People with type 2 diabetes have insulin, as you can see from the model. They will have insulin, but that insulin isn't being listened to by the cells, or the cells just refuse to listen to it anymore. Got more graphs. This is my dad does this. He injects too much insulin. What would happen? And we talk about it. I'm wary of time. Dinah might tell me off if I'm not quick enough. So once we have, let's say this, we've got to a point now where I'm quite happy we've built the model and this is the basic model, but I still want students to think with the model. So I have a set of questions that look like this. The model is if, because, then. On the left here, this is what I think happens most of the time in schools, where they are just paraphrasing what I've said or what the model says. Whereas what I try to get my students is to infer from the model. So these are the typical questions I ask. Most of the time, it's this, as we're building the model. But now I want to ask these. The most versatile is this one. This is harder for weaker students, I find, because it's too open for them. And the most inclusive type that still gets them thinking is this, where I give them an if and I give them a then, and then somehow they have to give a mechanism that matches the two. So explain how a person maintains, I can't read it, but you can see it, but this is basically one of those paraphrasing questions where the model, they just have to explain the model as it is. They would either talk about it or they might write it and I would read it. And I would typically give my answers like this. More blood glucose causes more insulin, more storage, less blood glucose. And that's just getting them to think with the model as it is. And then we move to the inferring questions. Infer why someone with a damaged pancreas will have higher blood glucose. And again, I would answer it. Eventually, I'd show them an answer, something like this. Typically, I have the students write in sentences. And I like to read what they write, and they're quite short answers, half a page. So it doesn't take me too long to read them all. And then I can come back to the class and we can talk. I find out very interesting things when I read their work about how they view the model. And here's just an example of one of those really open questions where I just give them an if. And what if insulin remains in the blood for longer than normal? And then they just have to go from there and use the model. This can give you really good insights into how students think. But I found that the weaker students can really struggle with that type of question, and which is why I prefer to, if I'm going to do any, I prefer to stick to giving them an if and a then and asking for a mechanism. This last question, though, can be really good if the model is very simple. We found with my younger students who are 11 years old, sometimes the models are very simple. And in physics, they can be quite simple. And in that case, this actually gives them something to think about, this type of question. But when the models become a bit more complex, like in biology or like ecological food web type models, then it's good to put a plug at the end to stop it getting wildly out of control, and students can think with the model and work through the model to try and find a mechanism. I think I did that in about 20 minutes, which I'm quite happy about. I have a website, which is my name. It's quite a new one, but that's where I've been putting my posts about how I teach. I have a section on how I teach certain topics, and I try to share it with biology teachers, but it's not easy. Teachers are very wedded to PowerPoint and presenting. they want to present things to students. And so it's not just stock and flow models. My way of teaching involves drawing and discussing the whole lesson as a conversation. So it's a bit of an uphill battle because there's so many differences. It's not just stock and flow models, but how to build them, how to get students to think with them. So there's many differences, but I'm not giving up. I'm still working hard on that.
What about your books?
Oh yeah, well I have two books. The one that maybe you're most interested with is called Difference Maker: Enacting Systems Theory in Biology Teaching. And that's where I kind of that's the book where I showcase like basically how I teach biology with stock and flow models and using cybernetics and activism. So it's all kind of a big systems kind of book.
And you can get it on Amazon, right?
Yeah, it's got it loads of places. I have loads of models I've drawn in the appendix. So there are maybe 40 models, and there's even an example that's 3,000 words long of how I would actually build it in a class. Because after writing the first book, I showed some stock and flow models, and I got messages from teachers saying like, "But what the hell do you do with these things?" So then I had to write another book talking about like how do I actually run a lesson on these, and that was the next book called Difference Maker. Which is, like I said, based on cybernetics
It should be on my shelf and I can't see it. I have both of your books. Oh, here it is.
that's it. Yeah, difference maker. Yeah, there you go.
And in the back, lots of the, I got to do this close to me. Lots of the stock flow diagrams, lots and lots and lots in the back. This is a pretty spectacular book. So if you're looking to buy one, this is good. And then the first one is also quite good. And they are not very expensive. So if you're really looking for something, I suggest these would be quite useful. Do you have any questions? Are there people with, do you have any questions from the audience? So how did you get started? What did you do first?
Well, like everybody, when I started teaching, everybody was using PowerPoint, so I used PowerPoints. But then I switched to drawing, and that was better. And the conversational model was better. But this was the time of Twitter, when before Elon Musk, a long time ago, and I met John Darko, and he showed me these models, and I knew straight away when I saw them that they were really, powerful things. But it took me a few years to work out how to get it to work in the classroom. I tried a few things. Sometimes the students would complain. The students don't like new things. So I often when I'm telling teachers now, I tell them it's a bit like when my son was learning to read, he didn't like it. But we do it because it's a way of being, and reading is a way of doing our culture. And eventually, he just gets used to it. And the same with physics. In physics, when they start physics, they have to start doing mathematical models. You could do a lot of physics qualitatively in it, but they put them through all of these mathematical formula, and you think, well, why is that? And it's because that's how you be a physicist, and they just get used to it very soon. And basically, that's how I found with stock and flow models is if you do it once or twice, the students are like, "What the hell is this?" They say, "I don't get it," and they get annoyed. But if it's a way of doing biology, like at least half my lessons are like this, then it just that's okay. Okay, this is the way you do biology, and they accept it, and they really revel in it eventually, because it's so much easier to have just a handful of symbols that never change. Um, topic over topic. It's like, oh, all these different biological structures, but we can look at them in exactly the same way every time, compared to PowerPoint slides where the structures are constantly changing and they're different every lesson. So they do really get into it. Like I said, luckily I teach quite a few classes now, year after year, and I really train them up, and it just becomes a way of being. But still, I find within half a term, you can get students quite used to it very quickly, 3 or 4 modules in, and they're really quite um, used to doing it. So that is one thing, was realizing that it couldn't just be a one-off. If we were going to draw these and talk about them, we had to, it had to be part of the teaching in some way. But also, I've learned a lot over the years. Like I had those models at the beginning, what works, basically with students, and just adding a bit of, you see this stock here, adding hands and feet. And it's like, wow, the students suddenly understand it, whereas if it's just a cold, hard box, it's like, what's that box? But now it's got fur and a bit of fat, and it actually makes a huge difference in the
Yeah.
classroom. You can add, if you just add one concrete element to it, sometimes suddenly the model makes sense to a student. And these are all just things I've learned through trial and error. I also learned mistakes were starting the curriculum with the models, and what I do now instead is I start maybe a week at the very beginning, just doing the symbols and the models, introducing them, and then I have them build models for silly things like the amount of rubbish in a bin, so that they know the symbols before we hit the biology, so they're not doing biology and the symbols at the same time. And that works really well. Where in the past I've just kind of thrown in this stock and flow model, and they're like, what's going on, But now they get the model out the way first, and then the biology comes with it. So it's been a long process of it's like little stupid things. Like when I first started drawing them, like those old stock and flow models where they've got like triangles here for the taps. You see those sometimes, and that's how I was doing it for quite a long time. And the kids were always like, "What the hell are those things?" And then one day I saw one of these taps drawn like this. I was like, "Oh, that's so much better." I draw a tap like this, and the students are like, "Oh, it's a tap," and suddenly they understand the model. It's just stupid things like this that you learn over
Yes.
time. Um, and now I just, I feel like I'm with writing that book, Difference Maker, my blog. It's like I've learned all these failures, and it's like trying to show teachers like what's actually worked after all this time.
Thank you, Christian, very much. This has been quite helpful and illuminating, and I appreciate very much your contribution to this symposium by sharing your work. We have another presenter, so we have to change gears right now, but we appreciate very much your coming and sharing this with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then I'm going to stop
Yeah.
sharing.